Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for being here today. My name is Megan Stanley. I'm the Executive Director for the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations. And I especially want to thank you for taking time out today to come and learn and join in with your fellow Pittsburghers. I know that we are all collectively struggling right now in different ways and on different levels, and this has been an incredibly hard week for all of us, but it means so much that you all showed up today to support diversity and to be allies. I'd like to just start by having a brief moment of silence now for all the lives that we've lost recently in different communities, but that are equally important to us. Thank you. As we learn today and ask questions and hopefully challenge each other, I really hope that today is only the beginning of our conversation and that we put what we learn into action, that we learn how to be better allies and to support our common humanity. Before we get started, I would like to go over some tech issues. So first of all, you'll notice that you're not able to chat, but you are able to ask questions. So you're going to just use the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your control panel. And during the slide share, you're going to see that the ASL interpreter, Jessica, is spotlighted while you hear the presenters talking. And then for our panel, we're going to stop screen sharing. So you should be able to see everyone in gallery view. And if you want to change your view, you can go to view options at the top of your screen and change to gallery, side-by-side mode, whatever works best for you. But just wanted to let you know that. And now I'm really happy and grateful to introduce your facilitator for this presentation, Ciora Thomas. Ciora is the founder and director of SisTersPGH, co-vice chair of the Pennsylvania Commission on LGBT Affairs, steering committee member of the Transgender Coalition of Pennsylvania, and chair of the mayor's LGBTQIA+ Advisory Council, as well as lead organizer for People's Pride Pittsburgh. And I'm sure there are many more titles there. Ciora does so much work to advocate for and represent the trans and non-binary communities in Pittsburgh. So I just want to thank you, Ciora, for your work. And now I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Megan. Sounded like a lot, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today during a time, again, like Megan had already mentioned, we are all feeling the aftermath of what's going on, especially our Black communities in Pittsburgh. And I want to send my love and affirmations out to our communities before we, get into this. And very appreciative of all of you coming today to learn. So in this training, and we'll get right into it, we're going to be going through defining gender and what that looks like, some gender myths, lived experience, protections against discrimination, and what being an ally or an accomplice looks like for trans and non-binary folk. Next slide. So here's just, some regular community agreements. Please take a moment to read through those. I'll just touch on one of these, just having sensitivity to diversity. We will remember that people in the group may differ in cultural background, sexual orientation, and or gender identity or gender expression, and we'll be careful about making insensitive or careless remarks. So just keep these community agreements in mind as we go through this and, as you navigate in the world around trans and non-binary people. Next slide. Defining gender. So we're going to talk about here sex, gender identity, and gender expression. And I'm really just going to be touching on things that are highlighted. I ask you to also, take some time and read through these as well, because for the sake of time, we have a lot of information to share with you today. I want to be able to get through that and get to our wonderful panelists. So as you can see, it's breaking down the difference between sex gender, gender expression, and body dysphoria. And I'll touch on body dysphoria of being feelings of intense discomfort with or dissociation from one's body due to the misalignment of gender and body or sex assigned at birth. And from my lived experience, I experienced this, in the beginning of my transition many, many years ago. And that dysphoria wouldn't leave until I transition into my true self, even before medically transitioning. So, and there are times, us as trans and non-binary folks still experience, dysphoric body dysphoria during our transition. So please keep that in mind. Next slide. So the gender binary. What this is breaking down is the binary and how it's been made up to be two parts or a system of two parts. When, as you can see, as we go along with this, you will understand that there are more than two parts of the binary. So, cisgender. A lot of my cisgender friends and allies haven't understood, right, what cisgender was. And I had to explain, well, that's you. Those who are outside of our transgender and non-binary communities, I think it was enlightening for cisgender people to understand and come to the enlightenment that they are cisgender. You do have a gender as well as trans people have a gender. So, and that's denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender corresponds with their sex assigned at birth. The person in the diagram identifies as cisgender and female. And as you can see here, it's breaking down that gender binary. It's breaking down sexual orientation and what that looks like and how it differs. And within our lived experience as trans people and cisgender people. Next slide. Transgender. Denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond with their sex assigned at birth. As you can see in the diagram, this person identifies as transgender and male. Non-binary. So this is the umbrella term for genders that falls somewhere in the middle of or beyond the gender spectrums. This can be used as a gender identity without further explanation. And I love to give this explanation to those I'm able to teach and talk to. Growing up as a trans person, as a trans woman, I was very binary. I lived inside the binary. I didn't understand how I would fit outside of that. But getting the education, yes, trans people are educated about other genders as well. And this was an experience that I had to not only learn about, but understand that I also fall in this spectrum of in this gender identity, to understand that I do not fall within the binary. And because I identify as a trans woman, and my identity outside of that, for me, was a non-binary experience. So it's going to be, and I'm saying this to say, all of us are learning together, right? Through these situations, we're all learning together. I make mistakes, you will make mistakes. But it's about learning from those mistakes and rectifying those mistakes that are made. Next slide. So the person in the diagram identifies as AMAB, assigned male at birth, and opera gender, a gender that is not concretely neither male nor female. She uses female pronouns. Now, pronouns will be just one part of a person's gender expression. Each person's diagram will look slightly different, and not every person has a fixed concept of gender. People who are gender fluid may fluctuate between genders, and a person's gender identity may evolve over their lifespan. Next slide. So here's some non-binary facts. Non-binary people are nothing new. Although a lot of us, again, including myself, are just being educated on our non-binary communities, people aren't confused about, or non-binary people aren't confused about their gender identity or following a new fad. Non-binary identities have been recognized for millennia by cultures and societies around the world. Some, but not all, non-binary people undergo medical procedures to make their bodies more congruent with their gender identity. Now, so this is our trans and non-binary umbrella. We talk about this a lot. And as you can see, within the trans and non-binary community, there is continually expanding gender diversity. For a growing list of terms and identities, reference, and please reference the handouts you will receive after this event for these identities. And I'll just go over 3. So we have trans, as we know, is a common name. And I also want to touch on transsexual and how we have gone into a time now where that's a slur to the trans community. That's a word we do not use. So when describing trans people, we want to stay away from the word transsexual. And we have transmasculine. And these are just different terms, again, that you will find in our handouts after this presentation. All right. And I see here, all right, I was going through a question. I see a question here. What are some local resources or groups for people in relationships, romantic or otherwise, with trans or non-binary individuals to connect or learn? We can definitely get to that after this presentation. So we're going to jump into some gender myths. So some gender myths. It's unnatural to be transgender or non-binary. Well, actually, transgender and non-binary are naturally transgender and non-binary. To not act on these feelings would be unnatural, forcing trans and non-binary people to hide who they are and causing them great pain. So we have to think about oppression. We have to think about oppression that can happen within the households for trans youth, for trans teens, trans adults that are navigating in the world. And if we are constantly in spaces of our cis allies in the conflict, excuse me, not understanding that we are naturally a part of this world, we are naturally a part of society that will continue to invalidate our lives and experiences. So just wanted to stump that. Next slide. So gender and sexual orientation are the same. Let me tell you that they are not. Gender are lesbian, gay, bisexual. These are our sexual orientations. Cisgender, transgender, these are binary gender identities. Non-binary, gender, this is a gender expansive gender identities. One's gender does not dictate their sexual orientation. And likewise, the gender of someone's partner does not dictate their sexual orientation. And I'll use my lived experience for example. So I am a trans woman and I identify as a queer woman. My partner, who is a trans man, he identifies as queer as well. So our relationship dynamics are completely different to what someone looking at us would assume. So it's never good to assume, you know, someone's gender or sexual orientation. Ask. Next slide. All right. So people choose to be transgender. Trans and non-binary youth have feelings at a very early age. I had feelings at an early age. A lot of us trans and non-binary folks had these feelings at a very early age. And it solidifies in our adolescence while transitioning into our adult years. So, but the choice is when said person decides to transition medically, which has been demonized within communities trans people live within, especially as youth. I always like to use Dwayne Wade and his family and how they have truly been a voice for supporting Black trans youth. and how inspirational that is for us all. And if you have not heard the stories about Dwayne Wade and his family and Zaya, please, please, please look that up and educate yourselves on their experience. So, transgender or non-binary, intersex. Some intersex people may identify as having trans or non-binary experience, and some trans and non-binary people may also be intersex, but these are not the same concept. So please, when understanding the differences and the things that may be comparable, please understand these are not the same concept. So lived experience in the Pittsburgh context. We'll jump right into that. I'm gonna take a sip of water, forgive me. So, how do intersectional identities affect a person's trans or non-binary experience? The following section discusses aspects of life for trans and non-binary people. People with 2 or more marginalized identities tend to have a different experience. We will be using people of color as an example, but trans and non-binary people exist within every marginalized community. Next slide. So, education and youth. I would hope those that are attending with us today are aware of Title IX, the current administration and what is going on. The administration plans to erase transgender definition, and this is sparking alarm all across the United States and across the world. People are watching what's happening here, and we'll jump into this video. So why this is necessary? The experience, for one. Young people express gender identity as early as age 3. Trans and non-binary people feel unsafe in their own communities, forcing us outside of our communities. And we talk about gentrification all the time. We have to start thinking about gender gentrification and what that is looking like for folks within communities. 64% of trans and non-binary students report verbal harassment at school, and 25% report physical harassment. And I want to go back to the video we just watched, where it mentioned 1.4 million trans people have been counted. And I want to highlight the importance of trans and non-binary people being counted in the census. Because if we were counted in the census as an actual viable human being, that number would be greater than that. So I always want us to be advocating for it, making sure that our communities are advocated for on those levels as well. Organizations working to change this narrative of Garden of Peace, and right in Pittsburgh, and we have these wonderful organizations right in Pittsburgh. Garden of Peace Project, Project Silk, of course, my organization, SisTersPGH, Dreams of Hope, and the Hugh Lane Wellness Foundation. Thank you all for your work and the work you have been putting in to Pittsburgh to support our trans and non-binary communities, and many, many more. So we talked about this at our previous, when we did our webinar for the media. And during that time, things were happening, right? As things have been happening during the protest, during our Black Lives Matter protest, and making sure that Black bodies are protected and centered during this work. And I want to make sure, while we are fighting this fight that is so necessary, and I say that as a Black woman, while we are doing this, we have to do this in an intersectional way. We have to acknowledge that being Black is not a monolith, that we are an intersectional community, being a human being, and understanding that we are an intersectional community. Ayanna Dior is a Black trans woman who was fighting for her life in Minnesota to be met with, or she was brutally attacked by 20 to 30 attackers using transphobic slurs. This video was going around the internet. Myself, I couldn't get through it, but I would advise those to educate yourselves on these situations. This is not the only time that this has happened, when trans people are showing up and being attacked by those around us because of transphobia. So we have to make sure, if you see something, do something. And I'm gonna say that again. If you see something, do something. Black trans people, specifically Black trans women, are being murdered and hunted around this state, around this country. And the numbers of our deaths are put on newspapers and the TVs, and it does not get the same energy as it does for other communities, specifically cisgender communities. And I challenge my cisgender allies and friends and loved ones to also keep that same energy that you would have for your cisgender counterparts, for our transgender communities. Tony McDade is another testament to the need of lifting up and valuing our intersectional trans communities. Tony McDade was shot dead by police in Tallahassee, and he was unarmed. Previous to this altercation with the police, he was attacked by 5 cisgender men who attacked him and brutally assaulted him. And we have to have these tough conversations to understand the importance of protecting our trans communities. I ask everyone watching with us today, if you can, to pour into their cups. Unfortunately, Tony McDade is not with us anymore, but his family has a GoFundMe, and they are collecting funds to support Tony, support the family. Ayanna is still with us, healing and trying to get through. And I ask that you also pour into Ayanna's Cash App to support her healing, to support her mental health, and support her fight and wanting, and I don't want to even use the word wanting, supporting the fight of being Black, because we are Black trans people. Being Black comes first, and we have no choice with that. So please, with me, I have donated to both, and I challenge you all to do the same. Next slide. So, law enforcement and criminal punishment. Trans and non-binary people experience mistreatment by police, 5 to 6 times the rate of sexual and physical assault during incarceration, mistreatment during immigration, detention, trans women of color in ACJ. I've had my stint in ACJ some years ago, and my experience in ACJ was horrible. I was housed with men. The guards were, I was assaulted by, or sexually assaulted by a guard. When I got into altercations with other inmates who were being transphobic, I was then put into the hole and separated from everyone for weeks. And that was for, it's for my safety. It was not for my safety. That was the most horrible experience in my life, to be locked in a room away from everyone else when I was attacked. And this still happens. My advocacy work around Allegheny County Jail has been a testament to that. And all of those that have been showing up in holding Allegheny County Jail accountable for how it has been treating our transgender and non-binary inmates within the jail. Organizations, and yeah, I just mentioned also, Let's Get Free and Swap. Please, 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 please connect with these organizations. Please donate to these organizations. This is how we find liberation for trans and non-binary people that are inside in the jail in our city, in our county. So housing. Trans and non-binary people are more likely to experience homelessness, more likely to experience homelessness as a child, and less likely to ever own a home. With that, bringing more lived experience into the equation. As a young person, I was pushed out of my home to the streets and did not have anywhere to live. I was homeless for years. And living that experience and seeing that this is happening in Pittsburgh and continuing to happen in Pittsburgh raises the importance of organizations like Sisters, like Proud Haven, like True TPGH. It raises the need for these organizations to exist. And I just want to make sure that we are also, again, pouring into what we have in Pittsburgh and making sure that our organizations are able to support those who experience homelessness. Next slide. So employment. Trans and non-binary people suffer economic advantages in the forms of higher unemployment rates, higher rates of firing, lower rates of hiring, employment and discrimination. And these are organizations that are doing the great work around making sure that these communities are served. And please reach out to them, connect to them, see what they're doing, and support. So mental and behavioral health. Trans and non-binary people experience high rates of suicide and suicidal ideation, risk of harmful providers, 8 times the rate of psychological distress, 3 times the rate of substance use. And I add to this, when trans and non-binary people come to our constituents, especially our cisgender allies, who tend to have more power and more privilege in society, when we come to you and we let you know that we are experiencing harm by providers, listen to us. And while listening to us, act. We ask you to put in the work to make sure that these providers are held accountable for what they may or may not be doing to our communities. But in our instance, if we need to come to you, and if we are holding providers accountable for mistreatment, believe us, back us, like we back our cisgender communities. Organizations working to change this narrative are listed. Please, again, and I'm going to say that again and again, reach out to these organizations, see what they're doing, see the work that they're doing, and support. So physical health. Many trans and non-binary people first seeing a doctor because of mistreatment, as I mentioned earlier, by medical professionals. We experience poorer health outcomes than our cisgender peers, and we do not have adequate or affirming insurance. Organizations working to change this narrative are listed. Please, again, reach out to them, see what they're doing, and support. So these are, we wanted to talk about arts and culture And trans and non-binary artists are an important, very, very important part of Pittsburgh's arts community. As you can see, we have Jude, who is known by many, Jude Benedict. They're a musician, amazing musician, and has been doing amazing things in Pittsburgh for so long. I'm a fan, many of us are a fan. We have Jerry Braidley, who is a poet and does amazing, amazing work. And I ask you all to please connect with them. We'll have their information as well for you to reach out to them. If you're not familiar with who they are, we want you to get familiar with who they are. So, advocacy and activism. Trans and non-binary people and allies in Pittsburgh are creating community and advocating for work or advocating for rights. We are out here doing the work, doing the work so hard. It's an everyday thing. A lot of us aren't even getting paid to do the work, right? We're just surviving, trying to thrive in Pittsburgh. And I'll just name a few here. We have Corey Frazier, director of Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy. They are a non-binary activist, an amazing human being. I've learned from Corey. I'm inspired from Corey, and I ask for all of us to be inspired by Corey and everyone listed here and those not listed here during the important work. Tasha Williams sued Allegheny County Jail for the multiple assaults she received while incarcerated in the men's side of the jail. This is another testament of what we talked about earlier, about making sure that we are protecting trans and non-binary people inside the prisons, inside the jails. We are faced with economic disadvantages that put us in situations to survive. So us wounding up in jail for things like sex work and needing to eat and needing to steal food to eat. Please, I ask you, keep an eye on those during that work because we're losing lives as well. So please pay attention to that and support our communities during doing this great work. Next slide. I'm gonna take a sip of water. It's a lot of talking, but I'm glad you all are here with us today. So protections in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, and I'm going to hand this off to Jam. Thank you so much, Jam, for being here with us and doing this, and yeah.
All right, everyone. Yeah, thank you for being here. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I'm going to just talk a little bit about protections in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County for gender identity and gender expression. So I just wanted to show this slide really quickly. This is an example of a type of discrimination protection. This is employment discrimination, and this is a map of PA, obviously. And we can see that Allegheny County and Pittsburgh are in a little bit of a special position in terms of the strength of their employment discrimination protections. This is due to all of the hard work that the community has done over the years to try to get themselves protected. So here in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, gender identity and gender expression are considered protected classes, the same way that we would consider race or sex or national origin protected classes. So I work for the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, and what we do inside the city of Pittsburgh is law enforcement against discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodations, and I'm just going to run through a few of the protections that we have here in the city of Pittsburgh and in Allegheny County against discrimination in those areas. This slide is talking about housing, things that are prohibited in housing, harassment, denial or delay of services, denial of housing, different terms, discriminatory advertisement, and retaliation. So if any of those things were to happen, on the basis of somebody's gender identity or gender expression, that could be considered illegal discrimination in the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. For example, if somebody had a trans or non-binary gender identity and gender expression, and they began to transition to living their true lives, their true selves, and their landlord would see them using a different set of clothing than they normally would, the landlord said, okay, I don't care, what you do in your own apartment, but when you come out to the common areas, when you're doing your laundry, you need to be wearing clothes that are congruent with your sex. We don't, do that in the common areas. That type of a situation could potentially be discriminatory and illegal in the city of Pittsburgh. I'm also going to talk about, employment. So this is another one of the areas that we have protections. In the workplace, harassment, difference of pay, wrongful termination, unfair hiring practices on the basis of gender identity or gender expression could be considered illegal discrimination in the city of Pittsburgh. Just as an example, let's say that you apply for a job, you have your name, your resume, all of your experience on there, you get a call, you do the phone interview, it goes great, they call you in for the second interview. When you come to the second interview, the people in the interview realize that your gender expression wasn't exactly what they were expecting to see. They didn't detect it from any of the other information, but once you got to that interview, they said, I'm not sure if you're gonna fit in with our office, and you didn't get the job. So unfair hiring practices, that would fall under that category, and that could be considered illegal discrimination in the city of Pittsburgh. Public accommodation, again, harassment, denial of services, different or worse treatment. Again, we'll do a denial of services example. So let's say that there was a clothing store that specialized in clothing of a particular gender as we've defined it for our society. And somebody comes in who's not of that gender and wants to come in and look around and see if there's something there that they might like. And this person starts going through the clothes and they're like, maybe I'll try this on and this on. And the manager of the store comes up and says, I'm sorry, our other customers are going to be uncomfortable with this. I don't think that you can come into the store. That kind of treatment could be considered discriminatory and illegal in the city of Pittsburgh. So the Commission on Human Relations does those three types of complaints: housing, employment, and public accommodations. We also take on two other types of issues: civil rights and community tension. So there are two other organizations that, when we're talking about the police, will be involved in an investigation. Those are the Citizen Police Review Board and the Office of Municipal Investigation. So when we're talking about civil rights, we're talking about somebody who feels that the city itself has prevented them from the full access of their civil rights. And if it were a police officer, that complaint would also go to the Citizen Police Review Board. But in any service that's provided by the city, when somebody is not being given the full access of their civil rights, they can make a complaint to us and we can investigate. The other category, community tension, this is a category where people in their community, they feel like there are one or two or more sides that are not seeing eye to eye, and it's related to a protected class. For example, gender identity. And these people would all like to live together and to understand each other better, but they're having trouble starting that conversation. So they can call us, Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, to have us try to help them start the conversation, and that's a community tension complaint. I also want to mention Allegheny County Human Relations Commission. In Allegheny County, they also have protections against discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression. So these protections don't end as soon as you step outside of the city of Pittsburgh into Wilkinsburg or any of the other municipalities. There are protections there. And if you were to find yourself discriminated against because of your gender identity or gender expression in one of the other municipalities in Allegheny County, you're going to want to give them a call. Just a couple words about being an ally or being an accomplice. A few tips. So we've chosen to highlight 2 practices to avoid. I'm sure that we can think of others, but these are 2 practices specifically that we wanted to call out. Misgendering, it's a verb, and it relates to when you're using a word that doesn't correctly reflect somebody's gender to identify them. It could be a pronoun, he, she, it could be a noun, man, woman, any of the things that are gendered, and we have many gendered nouns in our language. If you're using one that doesn't reflect somebody's gender, that refers to misgendering. Dead name. As a noun, it's the name that somebody no longer uses because it doesn't reflect their identity. The practice dead naming is using that name to refer to somebody. A lot of people, trans, non-binary, or other people, may experience trauma related to their dead name. And the reason that they are using a different name is because they need to put that part of their life aside so that they can live their lives without trauma and without pain. Using that name can bring up unnecessarily trauma for a person who's chosen a new name. So this is a little bit more about pronouns in depth. In our last webinar, we talked about the term preferred pronoun and how we're no longer using that term because a pronoun is not so much a preference as it is a reflection of somebody's identity and expression. So we're just using the term pronoun, or if you want, correct pronoun. And you never want to assume somebody's pronoun. You never want to do this because it could lead to you misgendering them, which, as we talked about, can be hurtful. It can lead to re-experiencing trauma. So you never want to assume somebody's pronoun. Always ask when you are meeting somebody new. And this asking for somebody's pronouns does 2 things. It gets you the correct information, for one, but it also signals to them that I am open to whatever your response is. I am an ally for people of multiple genders. So asking for somebody's pronouns is a great example of a way to signal I'm an ally and I know that there are multiple genders and I want to be an ally to all of them. Once you ask for somebody's pronoun, you want to try to get it right. You know, there's not a lot of use in asking for a pronoun and then getting it wrong after that. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And once you do that, you start to erode the trust between you and the person that you've asked. When somebody is giving you their pronouns, they're saying, okay, I can trust this person to get it right. So really try to get it right. At the same time, obviously, everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. So if somebody has told you, you know, you actually just misgendered me, I would recognize that for someone to come up to you and to say, you misgendered me, is a huge leap of faith and a huge action of courage to say, that was misgendering me. And so if somebody approaches you and says, you've misgendered me, accept responsibility for it. Say, you know what, that's my fault. It's not your job to continually remind me of your pronouns. It's my responsibility to get them correct in the future. And acknowledge that it took them courage to say, you misgendered me. Say thank you. It's really a compliment this person is giving you, saying, I feel I can trust you to make sure that you get this information correct. And I want to move forward with this relationship respectfully, because if they never brought it up, it would just cause mistrust throughout the whole relationship. These are a couple examples of gender expansive pronouns, and I'm just going to read one line, but you will get these after the program. On any of these pronouns that are new to you, I would maybe study up on them. If someone tells you that they have a new one, what I try to do is just practice it to myself, because it is difficult to put yourself in a new position and to do something new, but it's important. So you would just use any of these pronouns the same way that you would a pronoun that you're familiar with. If it's I love him, or if it's I love her, you would say I love them, I love em, I love zir, I love here, I love them. And it's important if someone tells you that they have one of these pronouns and you're not someone who picks up on things really, really quick like I am, I just practice it to myself and make sure that I'm gonna get it right when I see them, because I don't want to show someone misrespect when I refer to them. I'm referring to them because I care about them, because I respect them. I wanna mention them, and I want to do it correctly. A lot of the times when we're talking gendered language can just come up without us even knowing that it's happening. We have so many gendered nouns in the English language that it's almost hard to avoid. You meet someone on the street, you have a conversation. Later in the day, you say, you know, I just met this woman on the street, or I just met this guy on the street. And we've already gendered them without necessarily knowing what their gender identity is. So as much as possible, you want to try to use gender neutral nouns. I just met this person on the street, especially in writing. You know, giving the example, when you get a letter and it says, dear sir / madam, and you're thinking, well, I'm not either of those, I would just refer the person the way that the relationship is, how you are relating to that person. So instead of dear sir / madam, dear reader, dear citizen, dear resident, I mean, it covers all the genders when you're just referring to your relationship to that person. An example of needing to change gendered language that the commission has had to look at is when we had our pregnancy protections instated and using the term pregnant women. Instead of saying pregnant women, it was important for us to say people who are pregnant, because we recognize that categorizing people by their gender isn't necessarily useful. Rather, we should talk about groups of people, what they want, what they need, how they're identifying. So people who are pregnant as opposed to pregnant women. And here are just some everyday ways that you can support gender diversity. The same way as you would when you introduce yourself and say, what are your pronouns? Or these are my pronouns. Put it in your email signature. Putting it in your email signature kind of alerts everybody that, hey, I'm an ally. I know that there are more than one gender, more than two genders, and I am accepting of all of them. So when you put your pronoun in your email signature, it signals to people, hey, this is a practice that we all need to do because we're not just dealing with two genders. Make space for trans and non-binary voices. You know, it's really important as an ally. You know, you might want to fly your ally flag and let everyone know that you're an ally, and that's great. Let's say that you are invited to a meeting and they say, hey, I know that you're a trans and non-binary ally, and I'd really like you to come into this meeting. I'd really like you to give us your opinion as a trans and non-binary ally. It's important to then say, you know what, I am an ally and I love the community, but I'm not trans or non-binary. So I have this friend that I'd like you to talk to because it's really important that we get trans and non-binary experience from trans and non-binary people. Allies are wonderful, but as much as allies can do to get trans and non-binary people to the table is absolutely important. Challenge intolerant remarks and behavior. It can be really hard to start that conversation, but it is important to challenge behavior when you see that it's not respectful to trans and non-binary people. Listen to your trans and non-binary friends. That's how we learn. That's how we gain knowledge and understanding. That's how we develop empathy, is listening to other people and trying to start the process of understanding their experience. Of course, knowing that we'll never fully understand another's experience, but listening. Openly acknowledge when your knowledge is limited. This is something that we all want to do all the time. It's part of learning. So when you hear a new piece of information about a community that you're not a part of, instead of saying something like, well, I've never heard that, I don't think that could be true, and not that anyone out there is doing that, say, you know, I've never thought of that way. I've never heard of that. I'm gonna have to think about that. And just treat it as some new piece of information that you're processing and acknowledge that that's new to me. I think it makes the conversation much easier when you're starting the process of trying to understand one another. Okay, so thank you all for listening to the training part, and thank you to Ciora for giving us all of that information to start out so that we can properly frame our conversation. We're going to start with our panel discussion, and I'm so excited to have everyone here with me. Just kicking the panel off, I'm going to introduce everyone. So we know Ciora, she's given us all the information to frame our discussion, uses she, her, or they, them pronouns, and is the founder and director of Sisters Pittsburgh, along with many other positions. We have Coley Alston, who uses they, them, or ze, them. They're a native Pittsburgher, a Black African descendant of American slavery and sharecropping, AKA a badass, non-binary maverick, youth advocate and community weaver. We have Hoefnagel, they, them, the artistic program director for Dreams of Hope and a teaching artist with City Theater Company. Gonzalo Bird-Munoz, they, them, community support specialist at Project Silk. And Alicyn Simpson, she, her, who is a member of the Gender and Sexual Development Program and team and the program coordinator for TransBuddy at UPMC. So this is a huge group of advocates and a great set of organizations that we have representing our community. I want to just ask everyone an extremely difficult question to answer. And I'm going to start it off with Ali, and hopefully it's not too big of a question, but Ali, you get the least preparation for it. So for all of the panelists, starting with Ali, what is a project in this field that you've been working on that's important? Just one project that you want to bring to the spotlight. I know that's difficult.
Sure. So, you're right. So Dreams of Hope specifically does a varying programs. We do in-school programs. We're an arts-based organization, but a lot of our in-school programs combine art and activism. And so we'll do work in schools around queer history and rhetoric and protest language and things like that. Our theatric programming is our out-of-school programming, which of course has changed significantly over the last handful of months. But we typically bring together a good number of 13 to 21-year-olds, queer and trans young folks to create a large-scale production that they create entirely with themselves. There's adult facilitation and queer elders who are working with them, but they're really creating a large production that's all about what they deem important and what's important to them, and highlights their voices and their perspectives, and it's very empowering. Of course, in the last handful of months, that's changed. We weren't able to do our culminating event, so a lot of the projects that we're working on currently have changed. I imagine that many people who are on this webinar right now are feeling that, especially folks who work in nonprofit sectors have had to really kind of adjust what our work is. So some projects that we're working on right now in the face of kind of, we don't really know when things are going to go back to, how they used to be. And frankly, it's okay if they don't. And a lot of things shouldn't go back to the way that they used to be. But as an arts organization, right now, we're working on creating a weekly digital GSA. We don't know when we'll be able to get back into schools to help with GSA programming, which is also something that we do. And so we've started on Discord a GSA for young folks to join. And for me, GSAs do a couple of things. One is it's just a spot for queer folks to come together in solidarity and hold space with one another. I think when you get queer young people together, it's very different than when you get queer, cis, and straight folks together, and the things that they talk about and are important to them. It's really important that they hold their own space for that. And also to help facilitate them being organizers and to organize around things that are exciting to them and important to them. Dreams of Hope is an arts organization, and so we believe that art can do those things and can be a real conduit for those things, but it's really kind of up to them what they would like to do. So we have a digital GSA that's going up and will be going on indefinitely, and we're working on that. Our first meeting was last week, so we're just kind of getting our feet wet. And right now we've compiled a bunch of poems and performance pieces by queer young folks from all across the country, and our ensemble will be doing a digital reading of that. So those are the sort of the two, and there are other things that we're doing, but those are sort of two things that we're trying to adapt to with how things have changed, and projects that we feel are important to continue, even in the face of not really knowing how our work will look tomorrow, a week from now, a year from now. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure to not necessarily to pick one, but to remember that the work that we're doing in the face of everything that's happening is still important, and to find those new creative ways to make it so.
Yeah, absolutely. Gonzalo, how about you? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you for the reminder. So us at Silk, we're working on a lot of different things. Something we have coming up, hopefully in September, at the latest early October, given all of the COVID restrictions. We're still trying to figure out like when would be the best date, but we are planning on holding our second annual art show, which centers Black and Brown, trans and queer artists from the community. One of the things we found is really empowering about the art show is that we sell the pieces, we exhibit them in a public location. We're thinking about doing a virtual exhibition and doing like a web page to have the art year round, so that trans, non-binary, and queer artists can continually upload their work and sell it, because we think that, you know, we do a lot of supporting in terms of resource coordination, but when we can put money in people's pockets, that can really have a huge impact. So, and last year, every single person who created art left with money in their pocket. So we're hoping that this year, this sort of pattern repeats. Another thing that we are sort of continually doing, basically upon organizations' requests, is trainings. So we have done a couple of trainings in educational settings. One of them was at Pittsburgh Literacy, where we talked about best practices in the classroom when it comes to trans and non-binary students, and also specifically Black and Brown trans and non-binary students, as we understand that, you know, there are intersecting factors that make the experience of a Black and Brown trans or non-binary person different than a white trans or non-binary person. And so we also want to talk about those, have those conversations with people. And yeah, the trainings have been really great. They've been really participatory. So they gotten, I don't know, I feel good about them. And then other things we're sort of, continually working on. Project Silk is a safe space and resource center. So apart from just being kind of a drop-in center, if someone just needs like a chill place to, sort of escape, the world that can be pretty oppressive sometimes, it can be kind of this place to sort of go and be yourself, go and process what you're going through in a safe location where you're not going to face any judgment. Apart from that, we also do free STI and PrEP coordination. So we do STI testing and prevention, and we help link people to PrEP. We recognize that, there are technically lots of settings where people could get tested, but are those settings affirming? Are those settings, respecting the different ways in which people express their sexual identities, their gender identities, and how they relate to other people, other queer people? And, we understand that, that can, your identity is not always valued in every sort of medical setting, like Ciora discussed in the presentation. And so we want to make sure that people have a safe place to make sure they're on top of their sexual health, and a safe place where they can go and have those sexual conversations and have those, sensitive conversations that might not be welcome, or, people might find a little weird somewhere else. Like, it's not going to happen at Silk. And we, help people stay linked to care in terms of HIV prevention and HIV treatment services. Same with PrEP. We have telemedicine, so someone can go to our location, meet with a doctor over a tablet, like do a video chat consultation. And after getting blood work and being approved, they can have their PrEP sent to their home every month, or they can pick it up at Silk every month. It's basically, us finding out the way for you to access PrEP in the easiest and most consistent manner. And so we do a lot of that apart from just everyday, like, self-care workshops, cooking workshops. We're always like, you know, when we were at the space, we were constantly feeding people. We have a food pantry. People can come in and get some food resources any day of the week, you know, when we're open from 1 to 8. And we're still doing that now. We, if possible, like I would like to just share, and you know, if everybody could share information, that would be great, just because I think all of us are still working during COVID. We're just sort of finding new ways to make sure that people's needs are met. So we also have a therapist on site who, you know, you can just walk in and have an appointment with them. They are a non-binary person too, so that in terms of, you know, receiving gender affirming medical care, mental health care, you can sort of trust that you'll have an understanding, sort of listening ear, and yeah, just regular resource coordination too. So we can help with housing, employment, education. Yeah, just come in, tell us what you're struggling with, and we'll find a way to help.
Yeah, that sounds all like a really, really great set of programming, even during a pandemic. So yeah, that's awesome. Coley, how about you?
So some of the projects that I'm super excited about right now that we are really just continuing is I'm able to work with queer and trans youth who are affected by multiple systems, particularly foster care and juvenile justice. So I'm able to reach youth who are locked into congregate care settings, you know, like group homes, youth who are in residential treatment facilities, and basically any other place where it'd be really difficult for them to connect, places where youth aren't able to freely move and attend and go to community centers or events. So being able to support youth individually has been really helpful, and that they're able to receive, you know, an ear from an adult who is non-binary is really cool. And also we do have support groups that are based on cognitive behavioral therapy and minority stress models. So we're able to still have ongoing support for young people who, like I said, otherwise would not be able to go out into the community, and are also trying to address different barriers that they may have as far as gaining access. So those are things I'm really excited about. Thank you, Jam.
Yeah, that's awesome. Alicyn, how about you?
At TransBuddy Pittsburgh, we are really focused specifically on improving access and quality of care in healthcare, which is why I'm based at Children's Hospital. The standard model we had with our volunteer program, which was in-person support in healthcare settings, has not been possible because of the COVID situation. So like so many other orgs, we have moved a lot of what we do into a virtual space. So what we're primarily doing right now is providing a little bit of short-term support community through various virtual mediums, and also connecting people who need help, who don't have anywhere else to go to the other great organizations that we have in Pittsburgh, so that they can get the help they need. The project that I'm most involved with, that is closest to my heart, is our attempt to effectively provide cultural competency training to the entire healthcare system in Pittsburgh. And while my focus tends to be within the UPMC organization, other co-leaders in our group are working on other healthcare networks and other providers. And what we try to bring, and this is something that many of the organizations here have the capability to add to, you know, to provide to organizations in Pittsburgh, is that sort of that lived experience, that perspective of not just what to do, but why it's important. And that's really the key to our program and what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds really great. And then Ciora, last but not least, don't forget to unmute yourself.
So one project I'm really excited about is Project T. This is our housing initiative that we have been working on, and we bought a house in October of last year. The house needed some construction. The construction was going fine until COVID-19 came, and then that construction had to stop, delaying the process of getting that fixed. However, just recently, things have been picked back up, and the house should be in good shape at the end of the month, which we're all really excited about. We have a list of trans and non-binary folks that are looking for, that need housing. And that's like our main mission, is providing housing for trans and non-binary people, and housing with programming, not just putting trans and non-binary folk in a house, but actually allowing them to thrive through the program to move out into independence and be comfortable in independence. And that goes into the work I do with the city and to the state, and with the state, making sure that policies and protections and these things are in place for our trans and non-binary communities, while we are working to heal them through our homelessness initiatives. Through that, because of COVID-19, we were able to give back to our communities $30,000 during COVID, and we raised this money in a grassroots way. Pittsburgh and other supporters showed up, and we were able to disperse this money to LGBTQI+ individuals in Pittsburgh, and many of them suffering from not being able to pay rent or utilities or not having food. We organized around 20 volunteers who were doing deliveries to our LGBTQ+ communities, door deliveries, of course. But we were able to, get them delivery, get them groceries, get them cash cards, get them those essential things they needed to be able to sustain where they were. Because for a lot of people, they weren't even safe at home because they were dealing with like transphobic, homophobic, roommates or family members or whatever that will look like for them. So we were also making sure we were holding space for that and bringing aboard therapists to our team to be able to virtually talk to trans and non-binary people who reach out to our organization. So that has been working. We're still building that team. If there are therapists watching this, please reach out to us. And those that are doing the work, please reach out to our organizations to see if that support is needed. Brothers PGH, a new initiative, a new program that came out of Sisters PGH. This group is being ran by Sisters Vice Chair Mateo Aiden James Neville and Andrew Medved, and they have been having virtual Zoom calls with the trans mass community in Pittsburgh with an array of different topics. It's a weekly thing. It happens on Saturdays at 5:00 p.m. And it's really great to see like trans mass people be able to have their own space and talk through what's going on, especially during COVID. And we'll be transitioning that program into our community center in Swissville when we open back up. We'll be having that program going on there. We have another program ran by our newest board member, Marilyn Blackburn, who's a Black trans woman. She's coming in with a high focus on drug and rehab and making sure that that type of program is provided for trans and non-binary people, because we are lost in this. We don't have like affirming rehabs in Pittsburgh. And we need to have affirming rehabs in Pittsburgh because we know what's going on. Us that service our communities, like we see what's going on, and we need to be able to have a resource to send our people to when they need that. So we're hoping to provide that service at Sisters PGH in a way that looks like providing a place for folks that want to become clean or sober, and what that looks like for trans and non-binary people, right? We have a program within that called the 12 Transitions. And this is breaking down, the normal 12-step drug and rehab guidelines. Well, we've turned that into the 12 Transitions to make it more wordy for trans and non-binary people, so it's more comfortable.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, People's Pride. And we have been juggling, what's going to happen with People's Pride. I don't want to talk too much outside of my board here about what we're doing, but that's also another thing, for our organization, is that is a large income for us, being a Black trans-led organization. And when we're not able to hold this event, for the community, weighs on our organization with limited resources. So that's another thing that we're working on. So yeah.
Yeah, everyone's got so much going on. These are all really, really great projects. My next question is going first to Coley, but obviously to the whole panel. So Coley, you are a native Pittsburgher. I am not from Pittsburgh, and I love Pittsburgh, but I've noticed, having come from Boston, that it's different than the other city that I'm more familiar with. Can you tell me what you think is unique about the Pittsburgh context for trans and non-binary people?
Yeah. So yeah, I grew up in Pittsburgh, born and raised, family, several generations. We've been in Pittsburgh for a while. And I've noticed that Pittsburgh in general is just really resistant to accepting duality. Period. Just any type of intersection you can think of that, you know, we could do one, but any more than one, then everyone freaks out. It's a city that doesn't love you until you leave. And that sounds really harsh, but I'm thinking, when I say this, I'm thinking of Billy Porter. You know, I'm thinking of Lena Horne. I'm thinking of Sonia Renee Taylor. I'm thinking of August Wilson. All those people had to leave the city in order to get some love. And then, of course, now that they're gone and they're in other places, Pittsburgh, oh, yeah, I claimed them. Yeah, they were here first, but they didn't show that kind of love when we were here. So that's something I always think about with Pittsburgh. I think about there's this recurring conversation about why Pittsburgh can't retain Black talent. And it's this conversation that rarely evolves into action to actually fix the systems that make Pittsburgh the most unlivable for Black people. And then just from personal experience, you know, for years ago, I was working at a Black organization, real excited about it. And I was asked to stop holding space for queer and trans youth. So obviously that wasn't a good fit for me. I moved on. I ended up at an LGBTQ organization, and I was asked to stop making space for youth of color. So, you know, as I'm going through these places in Pittsburgh and trying to find a space for, you know, youth who are similar to me or may have other experiences, but are, you know, feeling outcasted or feeling that they don't have space for themselves, you know, it was really hard from an organizational perspective to make space. So actually I had to do, it's a little non-traditional, but basically it's a collective of Black non-binary folks. And we meet monthly, and of course during COVID it's gotten digital, yes we know, but the importance being that we meet, we don't have to pay for anything, you know, like everything's taken care of, whether we're going to anime conventions or Renaissance fairs, whatever. It's just kind of like a Black non-binary takeover, but it's a space for us where we don't have to dilute our Blackness for the white gaze, gaze spelled G-A-Y-Z-E.
Got you, thank you so much. Any other panelists want to jump in on the Pittsburgh context?
Add to that. Yeah. First of all, thank you, Coley, for saying that. That's everything that I've experienced in Pittsburgh. I'm born and raised here too, and have experienced all of that from working for nonprofits and for now, you know, having my own nonprofit. And I also found when my organization began to stand, there were so many trying to destroy it in the work. And I've seen that happen time and time again. And I can't explain how that looks, how that shows up. Just being a Black trans woman leading in this way. And before me, not being able to see what that looks like. I mean, I haven't seen what that looks like. So I'm just sometimes navigating blindly, right? Trying to make sure that we're okay, but it's still, again, to what Coley said, to everything Coley said, because that was just, it has been hard to be a Black trans woman within leadership roles, having a nonprofit, navigating in these ways. But I'm just thankful, again, for words like Coley mentioned, and thankful for the things that are happening. That's what I'm looking at as of now, like these things that I dreamt of as a homeless Black trans girl years ago, they're happening. And I have to sit on that and continue to do the work in my truth and knowing that. And yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah. So those are some really, really powerful experiences. I'm going to switch gears. I have a question about kind of the medical environment. And so I'm a trans person, and I've had some very kind of horrifying experiences with medical providers, you know, from people, you know, asking me disrespectful questions to an instance where someone removed my clothes without warning or permission. You know, things that happen to trans people in the medical setting can be very scary. And this question is going to Alicyn first, but of course to the rest of the panel. What advice would you give to medical professionals that are working with trans and non-binary people? And why would you give that advice?
Well, I guess the first advice would be to get culturally competent. I think that every medical professional, be they provider, staff, student, or volunteer, needs to be culturally competent in this area. It should be part of standard practice. And get that training from people with lived experience. There's so many of us, so many organizations in Pittsburgh. Really, though, the key advice I would give is to take all of this knowledge that has been presented to you and to incorporate it into your everyday life. We're not presenting special treatment for a specific demographic. We're just acknowledging the huge amount of diversity that already exists in what it is to be human. And you know, you need to apply that to every patient that comes in, to your fellow members of staff, to every person you meet on the street. Just make it part of your own lived experience and change that perspective on what it is to be human.
That's really, really great advice. Does anyone else want to jump in on this question of providing medical services to trans and non-binary people? What's some advice that we can give?
Can I jump in and
Yeah.
Something that I have found really helpful in my own experience is when doctors ask me what language I feel comfortable with using regarding my body. Some doctors I think most doctors kind of plow through and use what is sort of commonly used, but the reality is that trans people have different relationships with their bodies, and that not every trans person is going to have the same relationship. Like one trans person might be okay with a certain part of their body being referred to a certain way, and another person who even shares the same label might not feel comfortable with that. And that is for many different reasons that, you know, are individual to a trans person's experience. And so I think really following the lead of your patient and letting your patient define the language that is being used in the setting, whether it be a doctor's office, whether it be at a psychiatrist, psychologist, I think really kind of makes you feel safer as a trans person and makes you feel more respected and more understood.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. That's definitely true. So here's another, go ahead, Ciora.
Yeah, I just want to just throw out, if trans people say they are being harmed in medical spaces, believe us. Do not coddle the doctor that is causing the harm. Do not ignore it. Actually address the issue head on. Trans people should not have to be doing that. We should not have to rally at a doctor's office. We shouldn't have to put in labor to actually be heard and seen in a community that is supposed to be servicing us, especially if you are saying you are providing trans care service. If you are providing that service and you're not doing it correctly, be open to accountability and be open to having conversations with the communities that you are harming, especially if you're not a trans or non-binary person. So that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, those are really important tips. And this next question is coming to you as well, Ciora. We talked about being an ally and being accomplice. And we gave a few tips, but what are some other ways someone can be an ally or an accomplice? And if you have a thought about the difference between the two terms, you know, maybe speak to that. We also had a question come in. How can somebody be an ally without falling into this idea of a savior mentality? So that loaded question is coming to you, Ciora.
Write that down. So I've I've taken the word ally like out of my vocabulary as of late, because I found that allies in the word were not doing what they needed to be doing. When it comes to my life, when it comes to our lives, they weren't doing what they needed to be doing. It's like you mentioned earlier, just waving the ally flag and not really showing up like you should be showing up for our communities. So I transitioned into having accomplices. An accomplice for me is you'll lose your job to protect my life. No matter where you work, whether that's governmental, no matter where you work, you will put your job on the line to protect my life. And if you are not in a position to do that, I am not in a position to call you my accomplice. So it's a two-way street. I think we get so caught up in like needing allies or accomplices, which we do. We need people, standing with us and for us. But when people are taking up space and not doing anything, it's not allowing room for other accomplices who are really about that life to come in and put in some work to make sure that trans and non-binary people are included in all facets of life. The savior complex has kept so many people oppressed, especially Black and brown trans people and non-binary people. It has kept us so oppressed. You'll see trans and non-binary peoples, and this happens in Pittsburgh so much, trans and non-binary people talking about a program or a nonprofit they want to start. And white privilege comes in and takes that over and takes their very idea of what they had. They put their pen on the paper to talk about, and may even went to an ally to talk about it and get information. How do I start this? How do I do this? And then they take that away. Or they tokenize a trans person inside a space to seem inclusive within spaces. That's also a part of like this savior complex of not bringing trans people to the table in leadership roles. Like if you hire a trans person, hire them in a high role within your organization that is getting paid. And if it's an LGBTQ organization, trans and non-binary people should be getting paid a lot to be putting emotional labor into these organizations. We should be getting paid a lot and not minimal. So that's how you break that construct within organizations. So just to give other people time to talk, I'll stop there.
Yeah, and someone just mentioned that they've heard the term aspiring ally. I've never heard that. Has anyone heard that? Aspiring ally. Well, interesting. I've been trying to explain to people what I don't have a strong use of the two words, but what I've been told is that an ally is the person, when you've been arrested at a protest, you call your ally and you know that they're going to bail you out. But you can't call your accomplice. They were at the protest with you. They were there next to you. That's what people have used to explain the difference to me. Any other thoughts on this topic before we move on? Okay, let's see. So this next question is going to Gonzalo, but obviously open to all of the other panelists. Lots of trans and non-binary people are in relationships with people who identify as cis. My own partner of 10 years is still learning new ways to be supportive, and she identifies as cis. Gonzalo, how can partners be more sensitive of and aware of gender-related needs? And this might be also relevant to family members.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good question. So I think for a cis partner to be really supportive, I think it goes back to, again, having those conversations with your partner, or, really defining the language, the relationship, the dynamics that you feel comfortable with. So, for example, when it comes to the sexual aspect of a relationship, making sure that you have an understanding with things that you're okay with and things that you're not okay with, the language that you want to be used and the language that you want your partner to avoid. Certain, aspects or different ways in which sex might be gendered for you and might not feel comfortable for you, that you and your partner can communicate about and sort of avoid or modify. I think in the day-to-day relationship, there's so many little ways that we relate to each other, that we relate to people that we love, that are unintentionally, because we live under this binary society. We're born into it. We internalize a lot of things that we have to sort of unlearn. And so a lot of the ways we relate to people are gendered. So even conversations about when you're out on the street, if you want to I don't know, show affection, I've heard of trans people with cis partners who say hey, when you put your hand on the small of my back, it sometimes makes me feel this way, and would that be a possibility for another kind of affection to happen? All of those little conversations that can seem really specific, and it's just always better to be informed and always better to have the conversation rather than unintentionally cause harm. And so I think it has to be sort of this mutual understanding of communication of it. This is going to be an ongoing thing. This is going to be a changing thing, because also part of being trans, we talked about physical dysphoria. There's physical dysphoria, there's social dysphoria, and there's different ways they manifest. Some people experience dysphoria constantly. Some people experience dysphoria in waves. And so it something that you might talk to your partner about this, in 2018 might be different in 2019. You might be experiencing a different way of living or way of identifying or way of presenting. And so really for cis partners, it's as simple as just being open to conversation and remembering that it's not about you. It's just, it's about respecting your partner the same way that you as a cis person might have things that you're not comfortable with. You as a cis person might have experiences that make certain things or certain displays of affection uncomfortable for you. And so it really is sort of this commitment to this back and forth that's ongoing, that comes from a place of love, a place of wanting to understand, where you constantly sort of define what your boundaries are, define what your comfort is, and sort of build a relationship that is affirming to you.
Yeah, and then someone just asked a question that might be a good add-on. And then I'm wondering, Ali, maybe you might have a perspective of this as a person who works with youth and is a teacher in some areas. So someone asks, as a legal advocate or someone else who has to deal with both a youth and their family, how do you kind of navigate the situation of dead names and pronouns that don't match somebody when you have to do something related to their records or having a conversation with their parents or family?
That's a great question. I want to come to that, and I want to go back to the previous question though about cis partners. Just briefly, my experience with having cis partners has been a lot of defensiveness. If I see Gonzalo, of being like, hey, that thing you said or that thing you did is just kind of like patently transphobic or non-binary phobic or whatever it is, and that being met with, I'm queer because I'm dating a trans person, or I'm queer because I identify as queer, and therefore don't come at me with that. And just sort of not being open to that conversation. And I want to, cis queer people, that doesn't give you, who are dating trans folks or non-binary folks, doesn't automatically imbue you with more knowledge around trans folks and non-binary folks than people who are cis folks who date cis folks. And I think that my experience has been like, oh, I must know more, I must have more of a understanding of these things because I'm sleeping with somebody who's trans or non-binary, whatever, and it's not osmosis, you know what I mean? It doesn't just happen like that. So the defensiveness really needs to be checked and talked about too, and addressed and be like, hey, I'm sensing that you're feeling a certain way. Let's talk about that too. But just really open lines of communication. Cause going back to what Ciora was saying, if in a medical situation, if a trans person says you've caused harm, believe them, and don't say anything other than, oh my gosh, I am so sorry, tell me how I can correct that. That's it, right? That's all you actually have to do. So yeah, that's a great question. And something honestly, the one that somebody asked about, legality around working with young people and dead names. You know, it's something that I'm still, and I've been working with queer young people and their parents for 8 years. And it's still something that I'm trying to figure out best practices around, honestly. So something that I do as an individual, as an educator, and someone who works with queer young people, I don't mess with parents unless I absolutely have to. I do not get involved with the young person's parents unless they want to be involved, or it is clear that the young person themselves wants them to be involved. Otherwise, I do not require parental anything. For lots of different reasons. One is that a lot of our young people's gender identity and pronouns and names are changing all the time. And I say all the time, I mean every time I see them, they're trying on something different. And that's the person that I want to honor, right? That's the person that I want to be having a conversation with, not their parents about any of that. Unless, of course, that parent comes to me and says, I want to know, you know, I talk to my child about this. I want to get better. We're working together. How can we all work together? Then, of course, it's like, let's all have a conversation together. But that's happened once in 8 years, you know, like that's just very, very rare. And when you get parents involved, it's just a huge barrier to participation for a young person. When a young person knows that a parent needs to sign something, or a parent needs to be involved, or a parent needs to know where, you know, where they are at all times and all of those things, a lot of young people can't participate or end their participation after a while because it becomes too much to, you know, have to juggle those two things. I'm not advocating for being subversive and like sneaking around or anything, but like it can be dangerous, and we're open. You know, I've had parents who have reached out to me and demanded that I send their child home from our program in a snowstorm, and they lived in Mount Lebanon and we were in East Liberty. I'm never going to do that. And that kind of comes from, you know, like this parent being a little more involved than maybe they should have been, and sort of asking me to do things that, you know, were just out of our best practices and something we wouldn't do. So to get to your question on a more practical level, when you have to use somebody's legal name, you have to use their legal name. If it comes to payment, if it's something, if you have to do it, you have to do it. And sometimes, and I will often, with young people, if I, for instance, need to have their legal name for something that I really do need it for, which would be payment at the W-9, something like that, I don't ask them to say it out loud to me. I don't ask them to write it in an email. I hand whatever paperwork that needs to be filled out to them. They fill it out. I take it. I write what I need to take. And it's very like, nothing's made a big deal out of when it comes to that. Sometimes if I can sense that that's going to be triggering for them, I'll have a conversation with them and be like, look, I know that this is difficult. Here's the reason why. And just explain to them, here's the reason why I need this. And say, and I want to work with, you know, when we get to a place where you can legally change your name, let me help you with that. I know you're not there right now. You're 13, you're 14, or like whatever it is. You can't do that on your own, or, you know, whatever the circumstances are, but know that you'll get there and that you have that support to get there. Never, and this is the last thing I'll say, talk to the young person before you talk to their parents. I have young people who will say, I go by Elliot, but when you talk to my parents, call me this. They don't know that I go by this. So just have the conversation with the young person. The young person might be like, they know that I go by James, but, and they're not cool with it, but say it anyway because I want them to get used to it. Like the young person will guide you in what it is they want. So just have that conversation with them. Say, hey, I have to talk to your parent for X reason. What name should I use for you? What pronoun should I use for you? And they'll tell you, and trust them that they know, you know, that what they're doing. And know that what they're telling you is what's right for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're short on time, but Coley, I know you also work with youth a lot, so I'm going to get your perspective.
Sorry, yeah, just real quick. The last bit that Ali said was super important. Like, I always ask you first, you know, like, yes, I'm always going to use your name. I'm always going to use your pronouns. If, you know, as far as your safety, I need to know if you ever want me to switch that up with other adults that I might have to talk to, because again, I work in child welfare. So a lot of times I have youth through their family of origin, completely transphobic, don't want to hear any of that. And it's like, it's not about what they want. It's about what the child feels most comfortable about. And again, in child welfare, even in my case notes, it's the child's name. Now, if I have to use their government name for whatever reason, that's in parentheses. You know, the only reason in child welfare they need to use their legal name is in court. So use what makes the child feel safe and welcome.
Thank you. All right, we're probably going to end it there, but thank you to all of the panelists for all of this great information. You know, yes, Ciora.
Yeah, I left something out that's just totally important, and Ali reminded me. So we do also offer name changes at SisTersPGH. So if folks are looking for resources for name changes, please send them our way, send them to our website, and they can fill out our form, and that's all.
Yeah, no, that's really important. A lot of trans people, especially trans youth and non-binary youth, have huge barriers to change their name. Especially, it's really different here in Pennsylvania. I'm from Massachusetts, and it can be really, really difficult here, especially if you live in a rural area, to get to the right place to change your name. So it's really important to know where you can start to get help with that process. I want to thank all the panelists so much. Your knowledge is so appreciated, and it's so important that we can get your voices on these topics. And I want to thank our city and county partners, the LGBTQIA+ Advisory Council, the Gender Equity Commission, the Allegheny County Human Relations Commission, for giving us some advice along the way and giving us some guidance in the terms that we use and, you know, the way that we present this information. You know, just want to say that right now, you know, there's a lot of turmoil and unrest in our city. And I'm so impressed by how many people showed up for this conversation today and recognized that even in a time of, you know, unrest and in a time of, you know, complete disruption from our normal routine, that it's important to have these conversations about the diversity within our city, whether it's gender or race or any other type of diversity, and that so many Pittsburghers are willing to learn how to be better neighbors and better family members, better partners and friends. And learning this information is really just the beginning. So for all the people out there still listening, we're challenging you. You have the information now, and I know that you're dedicated because you came today. Go back into your community and make a change in a policy. Make a change in the way that you live your life to promote and protect the diversity that's here in our community in Pittsburgh. You know, whether you're an employer, a landlord, a manager, a friend, family member, partner, just continue to learn and change the way that you do your life as an individual and as a community together. So thank you all so much.